Hi, welcome to Masada in the Judean Desert. We really appreciate you being here with us today, and we're being led with our fantastic tour guide, David Sussman. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to put them in the Q&A. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. We want to thank our sponsors, Jewish Federation of Greater Atlanta, an innovative initiative, the Atlanta Jews of Color Council, Atlanta JCRC, Jewish Community Relations Council, and of course, the Consulate General of Israel to the Southeast. We want to thank our promotional partners, St. Louis Friends of Israel, Hillel of Georgia, Lawfare Project, Club Z, Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel and Jew Hatred, Atlanta Jewish Singles, Age Well Atlanta, the Marcus JCC of Atlanta, Hebrew Order of David International and their incredible Kosher Barbecue Festival, the Weber School, and Congregation B'nai Torah and B'nai B'rith International. And of course, our media partners, the Atlanta Jewish Connection, Patch, WABE, BeyondTheNest.com, Kids About, Out and About, the AHA Connection, Southern Jewish Life, and Israel Insight, the new magazine for Israel's Christian friends. Now, today is free for you, but there is a cost to it, like all of our programming. So if you can give with your hearts, we would truly appreciate it. You know, your money's not going to a very fancy building and big salaries. It's going right to the cause. Education about Israel, sharing, advocacy. We do so much, but we couldn't do it without your help. So thank you very much for helping us make it happen. David Sussman is our guide, and if you'd like to reach him and be able to book your tours live once we actually are able to get back into Israel, here's his contact. Or you can contact us at any time and we'd be happy to connect you. So here we go. David. David, are you here? I will say one of the wonderful things about doing a live tour is David's typically live with us. Every so often we lose internet connection. So hopefully he will be joining us right now.
Cheryl, can you hear me?
There he is.
All right, fantastic. Okay, well,
I can't see you though. Can anyone see David? There he is.
All right, good. Okay. We are live and we are rolling here from the edge of the Judean Desert at the base of Mount Masada. And I am so excited to be here with the Atlanta Israel Coalition once again for our series on discovering the land of Israel. As Cheryl said, my name is David Sussman. I run a company called David Sussman Israel Tours, bringing groups of various sizes here to the land. But due to COVID, the last 2 years, tourists have not been able to enter. And I'm very grateful to everybody at the Atlanta Israel Coalition and for all of you tuning in for several Sundays already to share your morning with me here in the land of Israel. So thank you to Cheryl and Lee and to everybody in the offices or wherever it is you're working from with the Atlanta Israel Coalition, bringing this fantastic content to people not just in Atlanta, but really around the world who are interested in learning more about this great land of ours, our heritage, and to learn about the facts on the ground here in Israel. So we're on the base of Mount Masada. You can see it actually just behind me, rising up. It's a beautiful mountain, but it's located in one of the lowest places in the world. Not one of, I will actually say the lowest place in the world. Because just behind me, just over here, it's a little bit hazy here, the beginning of dusk. But just over there, you have the Dead Sea. It's 1,500 feet below sea level. I came from Gush Etzion, just a little bit south of Jerusalem, from roughly about 3,000 feet above sea level. and I drove down this morning 1,500 feet below sea level. That's 4,500 feet. That's 700 feet shy of a mile. So I drove down into the crust of the earth to the lowest place in the world that you could walk on dry land. Absolutely amazing. In fact, when you look at that huge mountain behind me over here, which is roughly about, well, from where I'm standing right now, about 1,200 feet high, but it stands about 1,600 feet above the Dead Sea, which means that if the Dead Sea is 1,500 feet below sea level, so the top of Mount Masada behind me is only 100 feet above sea level. That's hard to imagine as we're looking at this huge mountain behind me. And of course, as many of you know, often people will hike up to the top of Masada. Now, it's really hot here in the Judean Desert. And as a result, in the summertime, they don't even allow people to attempt hiking up that mountain after like 9 o'clock in the morning because it's just too hot. So people will come early in the morning before sunrise, hike up to the top and watch the beautiful sunrise over, you got to take my word for it, the Moab Mountains, the Moabite Mountains, which is just on the other side of the Dead Sea, which is where the biblical nation of Moab was from. And I'm sure I must have in one of our previous tours. And if you haven't tuned into one of our previous tours in the past, well, you'll have the opportunity if you want to visit Atlanta Israel Coalition's Facebook site. They're all posted over there. If you haven't done so already, give them a like. Constantly producing great content, posting great content about Israel. But in addition, they'll also shoot you out an email at the end of this tour. You'll get it this evening or maybe tomorrow. And there'll be a link there so that you can watch the previous tours. Now, I must have mentioned on one of those previous tours before that the biblical nation of Moab, which is literally just over there on the other side of the Dead Sea, named after the child of Lot with one of his children, his daughters. Yeah, one of the children of Lot from one of his daughters. Are you following me right there? Lot had an ancestral relationship with a daughter of his. Yuck, disgusting. And yet from that nation that was spawned from that birth, a man by the name of Moab became the Moabites. And from the Moabites came this righteous Tzedekah, this righteous woman by the name of Ruth who will convert to Judaism. And from her great-grandson was none other than David Amelech, King David, the seed of Mashiach, which teaches one of the most incredible lessons in Judaism, that it doesn't matter where you come from. The only thing that matters is in which direction you are moving. And what a great story to start. The story of Masada, the great mountain that you can see behind me. Masada was originally constructed during the Hashmonean period, which is where we get the story of Hanukkah from. We just celebrated Hanukkah. The Hashmonean dynasty first built a small fortress on the top of that mountain. And why? They wanted to look out onto that biblical nation, the Moabites, our ancestral enemies, and our enemies even during that time as well, to make sure that they weren't amassing any troops on the edge of the Judean Desert, where a day's hike could lead you up to Jerusalem or Hebron or one of our other biblical cities, our holy cities, the backbone of Israel, the biblical heartland. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about Hebron. I'm talking about Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Shiloh, Shem, right? This is the biblical heartland. And so this was an obvious choice for a place to build a fortress to look out onto that ancient highway that used to run along this way called the King's Highway, that people used to traverse from the Mesopotamian empires all the way down to the Egyptian empires. But we don't know Masada because of the Hashmoneans. The reason why we know Masada is of the great, huge building structure that King Herod, the master architect, built at the top of that mountain. He builds a fortress fit for a king, because this is no longer just a lookout to make sure enemies aren't coming in, but this becomes a fortress in case the enemies from within want to rebel and revolt against Herod. Because he might have been a great architect, but he was a terrible person. In fact, here in Israel, we call him Herod the Horrible, because he was a horrible man who killed thousands of innocent people. And therefore, he was always afraid, and rightfully so, that people wanted his head on a silver platter. So he builds a fortress at the top of Masada that will be built to the highest level. He puts plaster all over it. He makes it look like marble. He builds bathhouses, and not just one. He builds 3 palaces to the north and a western palace on the other side of the mountain, and swimming pools. It's mosaics. It's so beautiful and so stunning. We're going to go up to the top. But there's another reason why we know Masada. And that is because this is where the last great stand against the Romans took place during the Great Revolt that will happen between the year 66 CE and 73 CE. CE means Common Era, right? A lot of people call it BC and AD. These are Christian terms, so I just try and use the academic terms. BCE, before the Common Era, and CE, the Common Era. And the Great Revolt against those Romans are going to take place between the year 66 CE. Of course, it reaches its peak moment of destruction with the burning of the temple in Jerusalem in the year 70 CE. And at that time, the Jews were faced with a question: where do we go from here? Do we capitulate? Do we surrender? Do we allow the Romans to do what they want with us, to shove us in a ghetto, to treat us as slaves, but also at the same time enable us to live another day? Or do we say, hell no, we won't go, and refuse to surrender? And if that's you, if you refuse to surrender, to live free or die, then your only choice is to come here to the edge of the Judean Desert, the end of the world as we know it, right? The edge of civilization, and to climb up that huge mountain over there, 1,200 feet up. It's like doing a Stairmaster for 120 stories, straight up those cliffs, zigzag. And that's why they call it the snake path, because it looks like a snake slithering its way up to the top of the mountain. And from there, you can at least live free without surrendering. So for those of you who don't know the story of Masada, it ends in tragedy. It ends with Masada falling, but it doesn't end with the Romans killing the Jews who are there, but rather the Jews killing themselves. And that's a tricky one, because we're talking about suicide here. And is suicide ever okay? Is there times that it is? And these are the questions that people who visit far and wide, Jews and non-Jews, religious and non-religious, are always battling when they come here to Masada. And it's one of the reasons why Masada is the most visited place in Israel, next to the Kotel. It doesn't matter what background or what kind of trip you're from. If you're coming here, you're gonna come to Masada. So what we did today is, as you can see, it's already dusk, the sun is setting, and we wanted to make sure that all of you would have the opportunity, as you know, with the great tours that we've provided in the past, is to give you a vibrant, colorful, full picture, the full story of the site that we're visiting today here in Masada. So me and my camera crew came out here early this morning, and we began to film at the top of Masada. And so in just a few moments, what we're going to do is we're going to go to a clip that will tell the story of Masada that we filmed live today, just this morning. And it's going to start actually in the building that you can see just behind me. It's a new visitor center that was constructed here maybe about 10, 15 years ago. And inside, there's a museum that shows some of the more intricate finds that were found here by the archaeologists when they excavated Masada. And from there, we take cable car all the way up to the top because, well, if you want to have any energy to do the guiding up top, you're not going to hike up there in the morning, that's for sure. So we're going to take the cable car all the way up to the top. And from the top, when we're looking down, there's going to be some great footage of all the Roman camps that were down below, including, you can't really make it out right now, but these stones that are lined up right here, this is actually a wall, a siege wall that was built by the Romans almost 2,000 years ago. And you might ask yourself, 2,000 years ago, how is it still standing? Well, it's not standing the way it was constructed perfectly here, but rather it's kind of tumbled, it's kind of broken up a little bit. And that's because we're in a really earthquake prone area, right? The Syrian African rift, it's the largest rift in the entire world, 3,600 miles. But it also hasn't eroded because, well, it doesn't rain that much here. In fact, it only rains maybe 10, 15 days a year. We're in the Judean Desert, my friends. Time stands still. And as a result, the only place in the world that we can still see a Roman siege. So, Lee, if you could, go ahead and roll our tour of Mount Masada.
All right, everybody, I'm so excited to be taking you up to the top of Masada. In just a few moments, we're going to go onto the cable car, which is going to bring us right up to the tippity top. But before that, I want to show you a little bit of the visitor center, what we have down here. And there's a wonderful topographical map that you can see right in front of you here. And you can see how the mountain of Masada right here is its own, like, rising. It's its own mountain in this area. So you can see it, in fact, on this side, we saw it from the outside. You can see the snake path, you know, making its way up to the top. That was the same trail that they took 2,000 years ago to ascend the mountain. Now here on the northern part, we're going to see pretty soon, but here's where Herod built his hanging palaces, defying the laws of gravity. And over here, I'm just going to zoom in real quick. You can see where the Romans built a ramp, okay? That is a man-made ramp in order to get to the top of Masada with all of their military equipment. But prior to that ramp being built, you'd have to zigzag your way up using what is known as the snake path on the eastern side. This is the western side right here of Masada, where that Roman ramp is. So this is just a great place to begin our journey here at Masada, giving us a beautiful, beautiful view all the way around of the mountain. But we're here to see a lot of the archaeology and the ruins over here and to learn about the magnificent story of Masada. So let's go on upstairs. I'm just gonna put my mask on because we are inside and we are still in the days of COVID. So come on upstairs with me. Now, on this next floor here at the visitor center, you can see some of the ruins that were discovered over here, some of the ancient pottery and pots. Over here, come on over here, you can actually see some of the coins. These are known as Masada coins. I actually have one of the original ones I have at home. I should have brought it with me today. But you can see a pile of coins that were found here that were printed during the time of the Great Revolt. And they are written in Hebrew. They still look like the modern day shekel of today. And it's written in Hebrew for the freedom of Zion, Shanat Bet, in the year 2. What's the year 2? In the second year of the rebellion, okay? Lots of coins like this were discovered here in Masada. These were the coins that were used by Jews here in the land of Israel. And if you're like me and you're Jewish and you're watching this right now, you should know without a doubt that your great-great-great-great-grandparents, however many greats ago, used those coins. So very special when you're visiting Masada or here in Israel to actually buy one of those coins. You can make them into a necklace, a ring, a bracelet, or whatever you want, but just to have a piece of history, but not just any history, your history, a coin that could have easily been used for one of your great-great-grandparents. Coming over here, you can see some of the beautiful Roman glass vessels from that time period as well. These are 2,000 years old. Again, just the beauty and the opulence of the material that was here during the days of King Herod. And of course, they would have lasted and survived and were probably used by the rebel forces that were here during the tragic end of the story of Masada and the Great Revolt, which will ultimately end in the year 2. In the year 73 CE of the Common Era. So come with me as we go up to the top of Masada. Right. All right. The cable car that we just rode up was constructed in 1998. And believe it or not, the bottom, come on over here. First of all, the first thing that one immediately notices is the beautiful views that you have of the entire valley here, the Dead Sea Basin, the lowest place on Earth, 1,500 feet below sea level. Now, there is a gradual incline until you get to the visitor center, just at the bottom where we ascended on the cable car. You can see it right there. So the Dead Sea, which is located just a little bit east, right, until the visitor center, you have a slight incline. So at the base of the cable car, it's roughly about, let's say about 900 feet below sea level. And we have just ascended on the cable car 1,000 feet. So we're only 100 feet above sea level right now. And the cable car was constructed in 1998, as I mentioned, but the original cable car, which was constructed in the 80s, actually stopped just a little bit below. You can kind of see the old docking station a little bit below over there. But the only problem with it is that it did not make Masada handicap accessible. So today it's completely handicap accessible, and you'll see there's ramps and paved pathways. And so anybody who might be in a wheelchair or difficulty walking can easily get around Masada. So we're out of the cable car, we're just walking up a little ramp over here until we get to the gate, right? The gate of ancient Masada. And why would there be a gate? Already you have to climb up this huge mountain in order to get into the fortress. Yet Herod still constructs a massive wall, and not just any wall. We're going to see the inside of the walls later on during the tour, but a massive casemate wall. And I'll explain what that is in a little while. So he has this massive wall around the top already of the mountain. The sheer cliff is already a wall. You know, there's already a wall, a natural God-made wall here of Masada. This is why Herod chooses to build his fortress here in the first place. And yet he still constructs this wall that you see right over here. And the reason why you have this wall is for optics. Okay, Herod wants everybody to realize how powerful he is and how rich he is. And what he'll do is he will cover the entire wall. In fact, he'll cover every single wall in Masada with a thick layer of plaster. You know, it's very easy for us when we visit these archaeological excavations in these sites to think that the people who lived 2,000 years ago would look at these, what we'll call dreary brown stones. But the fact of the matter is, as you can see a little bit over here, there would have been a thick layer of plaster, beautifully designed. And on the outside, he would have had artisans paint it to look like marble, okay? No marble was found here when archaeologists excavated the top of Masada. Yet, historians write about Masada being constructed from marble. So what was this? This was Herod using artisans to paint the plaster, known as a fresca, to look like marble. This is already the inside. And the reason why I paused here was to show you what a casemate wall is. This is the entrance, the gate into Masada, but the entire walls of Masada had an interior wall to my left, right, to your right probably, and the exterior wall to my right, probably to your left over here. The middle could be used as storerooms, or in addition, during times of conflict, the reason why the casemate wall was so good is they could fill it up with dirt. And this way, when people were coming with their battering rams, that dirt inside would give a little bit and absorb the brunt of the blow. And this made the walls that much more effective. Come with me as we continue to climb to the top here. So good, you can just look over here to your left, you can see some tourists who are visiting Masada. Most likely these are locals, these are Israelis, or maybe they're tourists that arrived before the travel ban of the new variant of COVID. which hopefully is going to be lifted in just a few days. You know, it was very, very exciting. We had on our last tour, Caesarea, I mentioned that we just had a large group here of 30 people that were visiting Israel. We thought tourism was going to be 100% back, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. But we're hoping that the borders will be open again soon for all of you to come visit our beautiful land, our beautiful state here in the land of Israel. But it's great to see these tourists, whether from abroad or they're from in Israel, paying a visit here to Masada. You know, come on over here. Because again, you're going to notice all around Masada, you'll notice this black line. And let me just clear the air right now and explain what that is, because it's going to be very puzzling to most of you. The black line that you see all around Masada denotes what is original. What do I mean by original? Exactly the way it was when archaeologists came here and excavated the top of Masada. Everything above was reconstructed, but it was reconstructed using the original stones that were found spread out throughout the top of Masada. In other words, Masada was either destroyed through its various battles, or most likely it was destroyed from the earthquakes. We're in a very heavy earthquake-prone area, which means the stones from the top would have fallen over and spread out over this area. They collected those stones and reconstructed Masada based on everything you see below the black line. And if you notice here, below the black line, you still have some original plaster that was covering the wall of this building behind me. Now, later on, we're going to see some of that original plaster, but we're going to see it painted with beautiful colors of ancient paint from 2,000 years ago, from the days of King Herod, when Masada, as we know it, was constructed. And where did all the building supplies come from? Well, right over here to my left, you can see one of the quarries, okay? This was one of the quarries in which they quarried out the stones in order to build the buildings here at the top of Masada. But in addition to this quarry, you also have several cisterns that were built here to collect the rainwater. And those cisterns, of course, the stones that they took out from the bedrock in order to create that cave to collect the water, would have been used in the building projects as well. Now, Herod was an avid athlete and he enjoyed sport tremendously. In fact, today we take it for granted that there's always been a first, second, and third prize, or in Olympic terms, gold, silver, and bronze. Well, guess what? It was King Herod who instituted that idea of having a second and third prize. And the reason why is that Herod realized that in every generation, you have a LeBron James type figure who, left to, you know, to judge him strictly on his performance, would have won the MVP for every year that he's basically been in the pros. So too in the Olympics, there was always a champion, and he would win first prize all the time. And if there wasn't a second, third, people would lose that competitive edge. So he instituted silver and bronze in the Olympics. And he also built up here at the top of Masada a swimming pool here in the middle of the Judean Desert. Now, I just wanted to show you this model very quickly so that you get an idea of what it is that we're going to be walking through here in the northern part of Masada. And first and foremost, what people will notice are these three large palaces. Herod had an ego bigger than anyone you can imagine. And he wanted to show that he could defy the laws of nature. And that's why 2 weeks ago, when we took you to Caesarea, he is the first one to institute marine cement. And he creates cement that will solidify in the waters of the Mediterranean. And he builds a port where there was no port. And as we mentioned when we were there 2 weeks ago, it rivaled that of Athens, right? In Jerusalem, in the holy city of Jerusalem. He will take a mountain and build a platform around it. Here in Masada, he's going to build his palaces right on the cliff's edge. kind of, not really, but like almost defying the laws of gravity. Because when you're all the way on the northern edge, it's sort of like the movie Titanic, right? Or at the very, very front, that could stand at the very edge of his palaces, and it would feel as though he's flying above the Judean desert. So he's got 3 palaces, which we're going to see in a little while. And in addition, he also has literally, I think there's about 15 storehouses in order that all of the supplies that a king deserves, like wine, olive oil, different types of grains that he can bake breads with, dried meat, fish, any type of delicacy from far and wide, both locally from the land of Israel, as well as being imported. And he builds them right here, because where we're standing right now is basically this room over here where my hand is. And this was the commandant's section. In other words, this was the security check. We went through the original gate of Masada. So anybody visiting Masada 2,000 years ago, they didn't have cable cars, would have had to hike up that snake path that we saw earlier, go through the gate, and before approaching the main palaces, they would have to walk through the commandant's area, show whatever credentials they needed in order to prove who they were. And then before coming to the throne room, which was the top palace, they would have to walk through all of the storehouses. And again, this is showing the opulence and the wealth and the power of King Herod. Now, I'm going to just bring you into this room real quick, just right on over here. And you're going to see some of that fresco that I was talking about earlier, okay? Now, take note of the black line, okay? Everything below the black line is original. And I know what you're thinking right now. This white plaster here does not look original. And you're right, it's not. However, it's below the black line. So what is original here is the beautiful colored plaster that you can see over in the bottom left-hand corner over here. And that is the same style of fresco. If any of you visited Pompeii or Rome and you saw some of the beautiful ancient plaster over there, this is the same style and the same method in its in the artistry of the painting of the plaster. You see, when the plaster is wet, they would take dyes that were created by plants, insects, and they would paint on the wet plaster, and it would dry together, giving it a very vibrant and long-lasting effect. In fact, 2,000 years later, we still can see the beautiful colors that were here at the top of Masada. The whole wall would have been painted just like this, but this is all that has survived after 2,000 years. Still pretty impressive, and there's a few other places here in Masada that will see some of this beautiful fresco. What they did was they removed it, they treated it, they put this plaster, right? Because this was the, first you have a thick layer of plaster, and then on top of that thick layer is where the fresco would be painted upon. And that's how you made it nice and smooth. Let's continue as we head north. Now, when I guide Masada, I like to break it into a few different characters that will make it a little easier for us to digest exactly what happened here, okay? So the first character I want to introduce you guys to is a guy by the name of Yosef Ben Matasya. But before I get there, again, look at this plaster, okay? Some of this is original plaster. It's below the black line. We are inside one of those rectangular storehouses that we saw in the model earlier. Herod would have never stepped foot in the storehouse. This is where his servants came to get everything that he needed to eat and to drink and to enjoy his, luxurious kingly lifestyle. But yet, even in the storehouses, he wanted everything to be clean. He wanted there to be plaster. He wanted it to be smooth. He wanted it to be opulent, okay? So back to Yosef Ben Matasya. Yosef Ben Matasya, first of all, we know Matasya, most of you probably know the reggae singer Matasya, but Matasya, the name, belonged to the priestly class. It was a name that was used by a lot of the Kohanim, right? The priestly class of Jews. And we just celebrated the holiday of Hanukkah. And during Hanukkah, we celebrate the fact that Matasya, right, started the rebellion against the Greek that would end with the re-inauguration of the temple, the re-sanctification of the temple, and of course the oil, which lasted for 8 days instead of only 1, which was the amount of oil that was actually there. So one of the miracles that we celebrate during the holiday of Hanukkah. Yosef ben Matasya, our first character, was of the priestly class. And if you were part of the priestly class towards the end of the Second Temple, it meant that you were extremely wealthy. Now, the end of the Second Temple period was a very, very dark time in Jewish history. There was a lot of corruption and embezzlement within the priestly class, and a lot of division amongst the Jews, right? You had 3 main groups of Jews. You had the Essenes, who were very radical and moved out here into the middle of the desert, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. And you had the Pharisees, were the Pharisaic Jews. The Pharisees is where we basically come from, that theology and ideology of Judaism. And then you had the Sadducees, and the Sadducees were very, very corrupt. And Yosef ben Matasyahu, coming from one of these families, very, very wealthy, was given the opportunity for the best education. He went to the best schools. Good schools cost money. And he wasn't just a good student, he was an absolute prodigy. And people recognized his brilliance and said, this Yosef ben Matasyahu has the potential of becoming the high priest one day. And his first assignment, his first priestly assignment, is to be the head priest of the Galilee, of the northern district. And when he goes there, he starts to hear people talk about the corruption within the priestly families in Jerusalem. And at first he says, this can't be, this is my family, they're not corrupt. But the more he listens, the more he hears, and the more he sees, the more he realizes that it's true. The priests of Jerusalem, not all, but many, had become corrupt. And so he took off his uniform of a priest and he put on the uniform of a rebel soldier. But he's a prodigy, brilliant. And so instead of using that brilliance to religious matters, he uses that brilliance to military matters. And he becomes not the high priest, but he becomes the chief architect of the rebellion against the Romans. And he'll lead the charge against the Romans in a place called Gamla in the Golan Heights. And that'll be the first place that will be defeated by the Romans. And after that, one by one, after another, cities are falling to the Romans. And so there's only one city left in the north, a place called Yotzbat. And in Yotzbat, Yosef ben Matasyahu hides in a cistern until he hears the fighting die down up above. And when he presumes it to be safe, he comes out of his hiding. And who does he see galloping towards him? None other than Vespasian. And Vespasian was the general in charge of the entire Roman onslaught here in the area of Judea, the land of Israel. And Vespasian sees that this is Yosef ben Matasyahu, and he realizes he has been in charge of these rebel forces who's killed thousands of his Roman soldiers, and he takes out his broadsword and he's ready to cut off his head, decapitate him right there. And he says, no, wait, don't kill me. He says, I'm more valuable to you alive than I am dead. I'm an educated Jew. I know how to read and write. I know the way the Jews think. Make me your right-hand man, and maybe we can come to a diplomatic solution to the fighting between our two nations, our two peoples. I'm sure he was just trying to save his own life. But because he could read and write, Vespasian saw this as an opportunity for somebody to chronicle all of his victories here in the land of Judea, the land of Israel. And he says, you know what, Yosef ben Matasyahu, I like your style, but you're too Jewish, the beard, the kippah. You know what, let me send you to Rome. And to learn what it's like to be a Roman, and when you come back, you're going to be my right-hand man, and I want you to record my victory here in the land of Judea. When he returns, he doesn't return as Yosef ben Matasyahu, but his new Roman name, anybody want to guess? That's right, Josephus Flavius, the historian. And without Josephus, we would not know what took place here on the top of Masada. Now, we are in the northern palaces, okay? We're in the top palace. The bottom palaces aren't accessible to us right now, but we get a good view from up here of what they look like. This top palace over here was his throne room. This is where everybody was welcome. The bottom, or the middle one, was a little bit more private. It was for him and his wives, his girlfriends, concubines, somebody he met last night, who knows? But the bottom one was only for King Herod, a place that he could turn it all off and relax and feel safe. Herod, amongst other things, was a paranoid man. He thought everybody was out to get him, and for good reason. He ruled the land with an iron fist. So he builds Masada, not because he's afraid of outside forces coming to attack him, because he already had peace with the Romans, and he already had peace with the Nabateans. His wife was a Nabatean princess. He had peace with the Edomians. He had peace with all of his neighbors, maybe with the exception of Egypt to the south. That was Cleopatra. But Herod is afraid of the rebellion from within, because here, nobody really liked King Herod. And so as you can see from this majestic view that we have up here from this northern palace, he felt safe on this high mountaintop that people would have to climb up, that was easily defendable because it wasn't easily accessible. Okay, now take a look. Look down below. First of all, let's just get our date straight. King Herod is here between the years, or he's ruling the land of Israel between the year 36 BCE until roughly the year 4 CE. The Romans and the Great Revolt is between the year 66 CE and the year 73 CE. The temple is destroyed in Jerusalem in the year 70 CE. It'll be 3 years later that the rebels who survived Jerusalem will come here. And what I'm just trying to show you here, because we're going to continue moving, is I just want you to look at that square you can see right there, and the wall that you can see running right here, and the large camp over there. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but from this vantage point, you really get a good idea of what's happening here. The wall extends all the way down the hill, and it wraps all the way around Masada, and there is another military camp all the way at the bottom there. You can see there, in fact, there's 8 of them that surround Masada. So we're going to talk a little bit about the reason why those were all constructed here at Masada by the Romans, because we're in the middle of nowhere. Is there really a necessity for a siege wall to be built around Masada? I don't think so. There's got to be another reason, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what I want to do is to continue to show you the opulence of Masada when King Herod built it. Because King Herod, I believe, had a strong Jewish identity, but he also identified himself as a Roman, even though the Romans probably didn't believe he was Roman. And so he wanted to prove to them how Roman he was. And so even here at Masada, he built himself a very, very Roman building known as a bathhouse. Okay. Now, a bathhouse isn't what we think, a place where you take a bath, right? Because Romans didn't bathe in the way that we bathe today. The way that they cleaned themselves was more like a schwitzer, in a steam room. And here at Masada, we have a beautiful, beautiful building. Some of it had to be reconstructed. Most of it's original of a Roman bathhouse. And the reason why this Roman bathhouse at the top of Masada is so special is that it's small. It was Herod's private bathhouse. And so it wasn't meant for a big city, but it's still built exactly the way it would have been built in a big city. And the first thing you'll notice is a beautiful courtyard. And here in the courtyard in a big city where everybody's going to the bathhouse, people will do their stretches and their calisthenics and show off their brawn and their muscles. Just like today when you go to the gym and people are lifting weights and you have the mirror because everybody wants to look at them. This is where everybody's showing off, their physique. But look at the original mosaic over here. You notice that there's no figures of man or animals. And this because at that time, this was against the Jewish tradition. we did not have images of man or animals in our building. So here you see his Jewish identity coming out. But at the same time, it's in a bathhouse, which is a very Roman place. Now, this room over here wasn't built modern, right? This is part of the bathhouse. And in a city, you might have about 40 of these rooms. This is a personal bathhouse, so you only have one. But this is where people with a little bit of money could come and get their eyebrows plucked, get their fingernails cleaned and cut, get a manicure, a pedicure, get a massage, right? We found all the tools that the beauticians use in order to give these services over. So the bathhouse was not here, but in a Roman city. It's free for all Roman citizens. If you had a little extra money, you could utilize some of the services that were also offered here, like going to see the beautician. Now, every Roman bathhouse has 4 rooms. The first room is the changing room. The second room is the Tepidarium, where you acclimate to the intense heat of the Columbarium, not C-O-L-D, but C-A-U-L-D, like a cauldron, which was the hot room where the schwitzing would take place. And then you had a frigidarium. And the frigidarium, come on, the frigidarium was where you would cool off in order to repeat the process. Just like in a steam room today at any gym, you're always going to have a shower right next to it. So you schwitz until you can't schwitz anymore. It's too much heat. It's cold shower. Here's the black line. Take a look around. Original fresca here in the bathhouse. An original seats. Now the seats would have been covered in something beautiful, maybe tiling. In fact, you can see some of the original tiling over here as well. And this would have covered the entire floor, most likely the benches as well. There's one thing here that's not original, and it's on the other side of the room. And you'll see that there's a square edifice that was built in the room. That, my friends, is actually a bathtub, but it's not original. This was built by the rebels who came here about 70 years after the death of Herod. They see this opulent, beautiful bathhouse, and they say to themselves, what do we need this for? This isn't who we are. What does every Jewish community need? The first thing that they will build is a mikvah, a ritual bath to spiritually purify themselves. Primarily, women use it after their menstrual cycle. And the first thing that you have to do before going into the spiritual waters is to clean yourself off physically. So the bath is here to clean oneself physically. And then you will go into the mikvah, which was formerly the frigidarium, but later on was used as a mikvah, ritual bath for spiritual purification. And I just think this is such a beautiful idea. First of all, it's incredible to see a mikvah from 2,000 years ago. Basically, it's amazing to see a mikvah designed in the same way it is designed today and used in the same way as well. And it's also just such a cool idea in Judaism that before you can even spiritually purify yourself, you need to physically purify yourself. So when you wrong somebody on Yom Kippur, before the Day of Atonement in Judaism, before you ask God to forgive you, you need to ask the people you wronged to forgive you first. Then you can spiritually purify yourself. Anyways, this is the Tepidarium over here. And you can see again some of the original frescoes of those deep reds over there, great yellows, and you can see some of the original tiles in the corner. And you can see the impression on the floor where the tiles went in. That's all original. Again, it's below the black line. Now we're just going to go through this relatively small doorway. Again, the floor is a little bit lower. Maybe they weren't as tall back then, but go through this archway. So cool. Into the Columbarium, not C-O-L-D, but C-A-U-L-D, the cauldron, the hot room, the furnace room. And one thing you'll notice immediately is on the floor, you'll see these pylons, okay? These pylons, which are original, held up a floor, right? A raised floor. You know, you have a drop-down ceiling in America, maybe in your basement. Here, you had an artificial floor that was raised up. And the space in between, and if you look over here, was where the furnaces were lit. You can still see the charred marks on the wall from the fires that burned here 2,000 years ago. And those fires would heat up the floor. And you can see, now that's not original in the corner over there, but it was reconstructed to give us an idea of how it all worked. But you can see the tiling over here, the pipes, the clay pipes that would pump in the hot air. You can actually still see some of the originals. Here, let me just see the camera. You can see some of the original pipes right there, right there. That's original pipe that piped in the hot air. Here you have the clay pipes replica pumping in hot air. And then where the fire was, you're going to have like a cauldron of water that would boil to give steam, right? So this is a very, very hot room with an artificially raised floor from those pylons, beautiful dome structure at the top. And the way that it would work is that, you know, when you sweat, it opens up your pores and allows all those blackheads and all the dirt and all the yuck to exit. And then they would lather you up in essential oils and peel away all the schmutz, and you'd be left feeling refreshed, clean, and smelling wonderful. Come, let's continue our tour. Let's get a nice little view of some of the tourists who are here. So wonderful to see. So far, we've been talking mostly about King Herod. I just want to talk a little bit about the rebels, okay? The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed again in the year 70 CE. The Jews of Jerusalem, really across the land of Israel, were left with two choices. One choice was to live in a ghetto that was authorized by the Romans, live underneath their oppression. You were not free to worship the one true God the way that he was meant to be worshiped, but rather you had to live under Roman rule. And the second option was to take that model, which I believe the state of New Hampshire stole from the Jews of Masada, which is to live free or die. And you say, I want to live free or die. You say, I'm not going to Yavne. I'm not going to live in a ghetto. I'm going to run to the Judean Desert, and I'm going to live on the top of Masada, which was captured by a few of the rebel soldiers. 972 Jews ended up here at the top of Masada. Who cares? 972 Jews. Like, really, the war is over. And you know what? Vespasian, who would become emperor, his son Titus thought exactly that. Titus, who's now leading the forces here, goes back to Rome and he says, hey, Pops, hey, Emperor Vespasian, we won the war. And Vespasian says, he goes, no, you didn't win the war. There's 972 Jews who are sticking their noses at us and saying, we'll never surrender. If that gets out to the rest of our empire, that we allowed them to live, then other nations will rebel against us as well. You make sure you go back to the land of Judea, the land of Israel, and you make sure every single one of those 972 Jews is killed. Well, Titus returns with his tail between his legs. He brings like a huge amount of the Roman army, the 10th Legion, the 22nd Legion. He'll even hire Armenians as mercenaries, and he will come here with maybe 10,000 men and build these huge Roman camps like the one you can see right over there. He builds 8 of them. He builds this siege wall that you can see running from that. There's another camp right there, right? Siege wall that you can see running here. It goes all the way down the mountain, goes all the way around Masada. Where's anybody going to go to? Look at this beautiful view. Where are they running to? There's nowhere to go out there. It's all a huge just desert. And I hate to use the term wasteland, but it's like a wasteland. Nothing's alive out there and nothing can survive out there. So where are they going to go? They're not going to go anywhere. This camp was psychological warfare, not for the Jews who were living at the top of Masada, but rather the rest of the nations that Rome had conquered and was oppressing, that says, if you rebel against us, it's as good as suicide, because we will spend every last nickel we have in our coffers to make sure that each and every single one of you is dead. So much so that in the middle of the Judean desert, we built a siege wall to make sure that no Jews escape and no Jews come in. But no Jews were coming in. No Jews were escaping. There's 10,000 Roman soldiers. Where are they going to go? So I'm not going to give the end of the story just yet. We'll save that for later on in the tour. But what I want you to do now is come with me, because I know we're jumping around a little bit, but where did all the water come from? I keep on saying that we're in the middle of the Judean desert. You know, it rains here like, I don't know, 10, 15 days a year. They get less than 50 milliliters of water, of rainwater a year here. That's like the size of a shot glass. So where did all this water come from? Well, Herod was a master architect, and he understood the lay of the land, and he understood how to collect as much rainwater as possible. And when he looked out into the land in this direction, he noticed that there was this natural basin. And no matter where those 50 milliliters of water fell, whether it was to the south, whether it was to the north, or whether it was to the west, it was all collected at the bottom of this natural basin. And from there, the flash floods could be directed through a system of aqueducts into cisterns that would be built by Herod on the side of the mountain here on Masada. Now, we're looking at a cistern here. This wasn't the cistern part of the system that I just mentioned. This is a separate cistern at the top of Masada that would be filled with the water that was collected in the cisterns on the side of the mountain here at Masada. And I understand sometimes it can be very difficult to really imagine everything that I'm trying to articulate to you. So thank God here at Masada, they got this great topographical map that we can use right now to understand the water system and how Herod was able to collect all of the water from the Judean desert to be used here at Masada for drinking water, for his bathhouse, to grow crops here at the top of Masada, for the animals that were up here that were producing fresh milk and cheeses, and also to fill his swimming pools, okay? So what we have over here, like I said, is a topographical map, okay? I'm just gonna climb up here. What I'm gonna ask my cameraman to do, Phil, you guys all know Phil, say hello to Phil, is Phil, just turn around and get that basin that I'm talking about over there, okay? And you can see where it collected the water. In fact, you know what? I'm going to take the camera for just 1 second. It might be a little bit easier here as I describe this to you all. It doesn't matter if it rains over there, if it rains over there, all that water is being concentrated right into the middle. And you can see these walls over here, that little riverbed right there, right? That's where the flash floods are going to go. And that's why the walls of that Roman fort were destroyed, because the flash floods moved those heavy stones. And he built a system of aqueducts. You can still see some of the original aqueduct right there, right? That channeled the water right there, that channeled the water across. He built a bridge across over here, and it would wrap around this side of the mountain and fill up these cisterns that he built down below. And I'm going to just telephoto. You can still see some of the aqueduct right there, right? And right there. There you go. There you go. Those little holes right there in the ground, those are cisterns that filled up with water. And now I'm going to show you on the map of exactly what it is that I am talking about, okay? The topographical map of everything we just saw. Here's the aqueducts that we just saw that crossed over this little valley. There's the cisterns over there, right? Here's the top of Masada. And now, make a nice wide angle and come over here. You can see And no matter where it's raining, that water is being directed towards those aqueducts and are going to be flowing into the cistern. And this is how water was collected here in Masada, that you had water all year round for the bathhouses, for drinking, for the animals, for the crops, and for the swimming pools that Herod built on the top of Masada. Let's take a look over here too. You just get a great profile of those three palaces that I was mentioning before. The throne room in which we were at the top, right there. And this second palace right there, and the last palace right there. Again, the hanging palaces of Masada, defying gravity, looking out onto the Judean Valley and the Dead Sea. It's a little hazy today, so you can't really see it so well, but that's the Dead Sea just over there. And Herod, again, he was a master builder. He understood the lay of the land. He also understood that the cool winds came from the north. The hot air generally came from the south. And that's why he builds his palaces here in the north. There's no air conditioning back then. So that cool breeze coming from the north would naturally cool off his palaces that were facing that direction. And before I jump in front of the camera again, let me just do a nice little panel shot view here of this beautiful area of the Judean Desert. Just absolutely stunning. All right, come with me. I want to show you a special room that was once used on the days of King Herod as a pen, right, for some of the livestock that he had up here. But when the rebel forces came here, they took this relatively large room. I say relatively because we're talking about 2,000 years ago. We're talking the top of Masada, and so it was a relatively large area that housed the stable, right, that housed the livestock, and they turned it into a place of kedusha, a place of holiness. They turned it into a synagogue, okay, to a Beit Knesset in Hebrew. And it would be here that the rebels would take their last stand, per se, their last meeting against the Romans. And Eliezer ben Yair, who was the head of the Roman troops, would give his famous speech, okay? But let's just go into the room first. Follow me over here. You can see this beautiful Hanukkah that's still here from the holiday of Hanukkah that we just celebrated. You can see these pillars. Again, the bases here, these are original. They would have supported the roof up above. You had the benches all around the side. This is where everybody would, gather, sit, learn Torah, pray to God together, and this is where they would communicate. So usually there's a scribe. Here, come, give me the camera for a second. Usually there's a scribe here who writes Sifrei Torah, who writes Torah scrolls inside this room. I don't see him here right now, but it is open. And you can see the desk in which he is writing a Sefer Torah. And he still writes it according to the ancient halacha. Halacha sometimes is translated into Jewish law, but it really comes from the word holech, which means to go. It really is the way of the Jew. And the way of the Jew tells us very clearly how a Sefer Torah needs to be written. And it needs to be written with a special quill. You can see there's the bird's feather right there, and a special ink that's produced in a very special way. You see it right there. And while you're writing a Sefer Torah, you also need to spiritually purify yourselves. You have to have the right thoughts going on in your mind, and you need to be reading it from another text to make sure that no mistakes are made, because these are God's word. You got to be very, very careful. But it's so cool to be able to come up here with your families, and for people who've never seen a scribe in action, you can come here and you can see a Sifrei Torah being written, and the rabbi who writes these Torah scrolls is actually allows people to write a letter themselves, so that you can write a letter in a Sefer Torah and fulfill the mitzvah that obligates us to do just that, to write a Sefer Torah. Now, I know it's only a letter; it's not a whole Sefer Torah, but even just writing one letter is considered as though you wrote the whole Sefer Torah. So come with me. Continue this way. And you can see some of the walls here of Masada and the casemate walls. These casemate walls, these insides, believe it or not, inside these rooms, this is where many of the rebels actually lived. Actually lived here in between the walls here. Okay. Today, these rooms are used for bar and bat mitzvahs when people are visiting, and usually these would be all being used, definitely on Mondays and Thursdays, which is the traditional time for bar and bat mitzvahs to take place. So let's continue along this casemate wall over here, where we'll see at least one or two interesting rooms along the way. One of them is a columbarium, which is where in ancient times people raised pigeons. And pigeons, a lot of people think were used for courier services, right? If you wanted to send a message somewhere, you could take one of the honing pigeons with you and send the message back. But that wasn't the case. It might have been used for that as well. But pigeons was the primary source of protein here at Masada and other areas as well. It's actually a kosher bird. And before chickens were domesticated or created, I'm not too sure exactly when, but before chickens became an easy source of protein and meat, pigeons is what most of the people ate. And so these columbariums, one of which is right here, you can see the way that the stones are kind of checkered and even open a little cubby hole. That cubby have been used for birds to nest. But there's a much better example of it just around the corner here. And so we'll take a look at this other columbarium where they used to raise these pigeons. And maybe some of you read the book, The Dove Keepers, which is about the story of Masada. This is why it's called the Dove Keepers, because they used to raise pigeons here. So we're going to go into this room and you'll see these beautiful examples of these cubby holes, each one for a nest. And pigeons, and this is where they were raised. And pigeons always come home, they always come back to their nest. So it wasn't like you had to trap them in here and they had a way to fly out through the window, come get a nice little shot, like just go right out that window and show everybody the beautiful view and the exit here of the columbarium for the birds when they want to leave and come back. But where I really want to take you to right now is to the Roman, okay? And we're going to talk about the final moments of Masada. The rebels who came here from Jerusalem, right, live free or die, refuse to surrender. They come here to Masada, 972 of them. By the way, anybody know what the country code is to Israel? Right? If you want to call me in Israel, you would dial the country code. The country code here is 972. Now, I'm pretty certain that Israel didn't go to the international community and say, hey, we want to remember the 972 Jews from the top of Masada. Do you think we could make our, international calling number 972? Because I think if we did that, they'd probably say no way, and they'd give us some number like, I don't know, 666. I'm only joking. We didn't go there and ask for 972, but you're talking to a religious guy. And I believe those that remember God, God remembers them as well. And those rebel forces that came here believed wholeheartedly in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in Hashem, in God, and they died because of that faith and that belief. And so maybe it was God that was remembering them when he made the country code here for Israel, 972. 972 Jews at the top of Masada. They survived for a number of years. It's impenetrable. Nobody's going to be able to come to the top, because if somebody's trying to scale the cliffs here or climb up, all I need to do is pick up a stone and throw it down, and one hit in the head and that soldier's done. So it's very easy to defend Masada. The Romans realized the only way they're going to be able to put an end to those 972 Jews is to breach the walls and to be able to build a ramp that will be able to bring a massive army to the top here of Masada. And they start to build the ramp, but of course the Jews are defending themselves, and with their slingshots and whatever else they're using are defending themselves. And one by one, these Roman soldiers are being killed. And that's when Rome realized that it's no point in using our own soldiers. They used Jewish slaves. And once the rebels realized that those were Jewish slaves down there who had no choice of building that ramp, they allowed them to build the ramp. And what you're seeing right now is the remnant of that Roman ramp. It's really the only thing here that's really eroded over the last 2,000 years. Again, the desert, like time stands still here. You still see the Roman camps and the siege wall, but the ramp was made with a lot of dirt. And dirt, over time, with the wind and the rain, it is eroded. But that ramp came all the way up here, and it was here that they came with their battering rams, and they pushed the walls of Masada in. And now all they had to do was come in and slaughter everybody on top. But they didn't come in. Instead, they went back down the ramp, back to their camp, and they had a luau, a party, a barbecue, a feast, because they realized there was no place for those Jews to go to, and that the next day they were finally going to put an end to this rebellion that had been going on for 7 years. These just feisty, stubborn, stiff-necked Jews who refused to surrender. But the Jews who were up here had another idea. They weren't going to allow the Romans to be pleased in murdering them, in shedding their own blood, or maybe even worse, what they would do to their wives or their children, their young girls and their young boys. Who knows where they would ship them off to, how they would be treated, if you know what I'm saying. They said maybe the best thing for us to do is to take our own lives. But suicide, that's not acceptable really today. It's not acceptable in the Torah. In fact, it's the gravest, worst sin possible. Because at least when you murder somebody, which is one of the capital sins, you're getting something from it, right? Something, I don't know, you're getting something from it. But when you murder yourself, you lose the one thing that was given to you, which is your ability to choose, your ability to breathe, your own life. However, the Torah does go into when is suicide acceptable, when is it not acceptable in this situation, in that situation, and it's a sensitive subject. But I was brought up thinking that that's never a solution. And so I always had a difficulty with this, that they sat in a room and they said, you know, let's take our own lives. And, oh, we can't commit suicide. So one person killed everybody else. And only that one person had to commit suicide. And he fell on his own sword. And how do we even know the story of Masada if they all killed themselves? Well, there were 5 survivors, 2 women, 3 children that were hiding in a cistern. And when they actually came up from the cistern and the Romans saw them, that these were the 5 survivors, that they were the wives and the children of the heroes, that the Romans saw them as being heroes, that they actually were brave enough to take their own lives rather than let the Romans kill them, they were actually treated very well. And they're the ones that gave over their account of what took place here at Masada to who? Josephus Flavius, right? Our first character that we met way back when, Yosef Ben Matasya. But still, it's a troubling narrative. At the end of the day, they committed suicide. How can we accept that? And it wasn't until I was sitting in yeshiva, a house of Torah study of Jewish philosophy, and I heard this great rabbi, Rav Noah Weinberg of Esha Torah, in blessed memory, he passed away about 11, 12 years ago. And he gave over a class where he broke down human pleasures into 5 distinct categories. He said the easiest form of pleasure is physical pleasure, right? You're hungry, you eat some food, you're satisfied, right? You're tired, you go to sleep, feels great. We've all had a long day at work. We put our feet up on the couch and we finally get into bed. We're like, that feels so good. So we know that pleasure is a wonderful thing. What could be better than physical pleasure? Love. And all the physical pleasure in the world isn't worth 1 iota of the pleasure one experiences for love. And the proof of that is that if you're a parent, if somebody came to you and said, I'll give you billions of dollars, endless flow of money, you can satisfy any physical desire you could ever possibly imagine, the only thing is I'm going to take your children. I'm not going to abuse them, but you'll never hear of their successes. You'll never hear of their happiness. All of us would say no, because that pleasure that we experience when we see our children succeed in something goes beyond any physical pleasure that we could experience. Well, my rabbi, Rav Noah Weinberg, he said this is where most of the humanity taps out. Only 4th level pleasure, watch out. Only fourth level pleasure. So what could be better than love? He says, living a life with purpose and meaning. You know, when I guide groups here, Jewish groups, Christian groups, religious groups, not religious groups, I see so many people, they bend down, they pick up a stone, they rub it between their fingers, they put it in their pocket. They want to put it on their mantle when they get home. Why? What are they trying to capture here at Masada that they want to take that little stone, they want to have a memory of it? And I think this is the reason why, is because they want to remember that living a life with purpose and meaning is above even the pleasures we experience in love. Here in Israel, we know that because we send our children to go fight in our army where they risk their lives. So we're willing to sacrifice our children in our armies. We're not suicide bombers, God forbid. But we do know that serving in the army, right? Life and death is, you know, it's in the line there. And so we're still willing to do that. Why? Because having the land of Israel is important to us. Having our home, once again, is important to us. And so coming here and sharing this story of the suicide that took place, and the whole story here, in this beautiful mountaintop of Masada, really what we should be asking ourselves is, what am I living for? What am I willing to die for? And if you know what you're willing to die for, you'll know what you're willing to live for. I'm going to leave you with that idea as we head back down to the bottom of Masada, where I'll be joining you live once again.
Hey, David.
All right, fantastic. Hope you guys enjoyed that tour at the top of Masada. And as you can see, it's already dark here in Israel. And I'm just standing next to this really unique geological formation that was formed by what was formerly known as the Lisan Lake, the remnant of which is the Dead Sea. And you can see it just crumbles apart, but it's really amazing. You can see these lines, the black and white lines. Each line of white and brown together represents 1 year, okay? The white line is the summer months when there's no rain, and the brown lines is soil that came down during the flash floods and settled down at the bottom. So just this little, you know, heap of Dead Sea matter is probably 1,500 years, maybe even more. Anyhow, we do have some time here. I'd love to field some questions. I saw that the numbers were good. Everybody stayed with us the entire tour, and there was a few questions in the Q&A. So Cheryl, I'm happy to field any questions that anybody had.
Well, somebody wants to know how deep the Dead Sea goes to its very bottom. Would you know?
That's a great question. And you know, if you're already familiar with me from the previous tours, I can't give a simple answer. So the lengthy answer of that is that the Dead Sea is receding. Every year we lose roughly about 1 meter of depth of water for various reasons that we don't have the time to go into. So the Dead Sea is shrinking, and there's efforts being made to preserve it and to make sure that it doesn't disappear. But even if we didn't make those steps to preserve the Dead Sea, it's not going anywhere anytime quick, because it's 400 meters, 1,200 feet deep at its deepest location, which means we would have roughly about 400 years if the evaporation process and the receding of the Dead Sea remain the same. So we're 1,500 feet below sea level, and the Dead Sea goes down another 1,200 feet. Any other questions, Cheryl?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Were the Essenes, thank you, ever at Masada?
Yeah, great question. We don't believe so, that the Essenes were here. The Essenes were one of the groups of Jews towards the end of the Second Temple period. You see, Jews here in Israel were very fractured. There was a time of a lot of discontent with one another. In fact, spiritually speaking, our rabbis tell us that the Second Temple was destroyed, obviously by the hands of the Romans, But spiritually, the reason is that we had baseless hatred towards one another. And that was created by all these different sects of Judaism not being able or willing to see the other's point of view. The three main groups I mentioned on the top of Masada were the Essenes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees, okay? The Essenes actually lived just north of Masada in a place called Qumran. At least that's where they went to when they left Jerusalem. And I don't know how much time we have, but in short, this is the community that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in one of those scrolls, first of all, you have all the books of the Bible, of the Jewish scriptures, with the exception of the Megillah of Esther. But you also have Apocrypha, you have outside scrolls and texts that talk about the community life in Qumran. And in one of those, it talks about this guy, Jonathan, who left the community for an unknown reason. And many Christians believe that this Jonathan would become John the Baptist, because the Essene communities believed in spiritual purification, and they went to that ritual bath known as a mikvah constantly. So Christians believe that he left this community of Qumran in order to tell everybody that the Messiah is coming and we need to spiritually purify ourselves. But of course, there really is no archaeological or scriptural proof of that theory, but it is a theory that many Christians do have. So the Essenes were not here in Masada, but they weren't far from here, just a little bit up north in a place called Qumran, and they're the ones who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Do they have a graveyard on Masada? And what did the Romans do with the Jewish bodies?
Yeah, so from our understanding, what from Josephus writes, is that they actually gave them a proper burial because they kind of saw them as heroes almost, that they were brave enough to commit suicide rather than allow the Romans to kill them themselves. But we don't know where that graveyard is. It was never found. It is possible maybe that animals, dug up the bodies or did something in that regard, but at the end of the day, we don't know where they were buried.
How did they get the water up?
Yeah, great question. We talked about the whole water system of Masada. So they collected the water, the flash floods, and then there were servants here who would have to, there was a path, you saw it was on the side of the cliff, it wasn't all the way down, relatively, right? Short hike down, they could collect barrels of water and then bring it up to the top, whether it was, by hand, people hiking with the water, or if they had donkeys that would schlep the water up to the top. And then they filled the swimming pools and the cisterns at the top of Masada so that there was always water easily accessible for those that were there. I should also mention, just as a side note, that we really have no record of Herod ever coming here to Masada after it was built. We have to assume that he was, but we do have writings that talks about his family coming here, and that this was a place that his family sought refuge and just relaxation often.
Well, thank you so much, David. This was an incredible tour. Really appreciate
Cheryl,
it.
Thank you again. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Atlanta Israel Coalition for everything you do for the state of Israel, for the Jews living here, and just spreading the truth of Israel around the world. As I mentioned earlier, the Atlanta Israel Coalition is Atlanta only by name. They have a far reach around the world, spreading the message of Israel far and wide. And I truly appreciate this opportunity to do what I love to do during these difficult COVID times. And Cheryl had mentioned that all those that work for the AIC, they don't get paid. They do this out of the love of their heart. Thank God they do pay me to do this, because it's been some difficult times here. So if you could help out the AIC, if you have it in your heart and in your wallet, to give a donation so that they can continue to do the great work that they do for Israel and for Jews around the world, and simply for spreading the truth. So please do give. And again, Cheryl, Lee, everybody at AIC, and all of you who stay in tune during this tour, thank you.
Thank you. And please join us for our next few tours. David will be our tour guide, and you can be sure it will be absolutely wonderful. Thanks again to our sponsors, And if you would like to sponsor your organization, it's absolutely not too late. We still have some more tours and would love your participation and assistance. The Jewish Federation of Greater Atlanta, the Consulate General of Israel to Southeast, Atlanta's JCRC, and AJOCC, Atlanta's Jews of Color Council. Thanks again to our promotional partners and our media partners. And thank you to David for doing these tours with us. And of course, thank you for joining us. Please register for the upcoming tours. There's the link. You'll get a survey asking for feedback. We want to be able to make these the best trips possible. So please provide your feedback. We're able to improve and do more for you that way. To learn about Atlanta Israel Coalition, multiple ways, please click on our Facebook. Again, donations are what keeps us going. So if you could give, we'd appreciate it. Hope to see you next time, and thank you for being here.